On behalf of Tricycle Magazine, I want to welcome you to this chat between Joseph Goldstein and Gail Stark. My name is Amy Gross. I'm a contributing editor at Tricycle and a board member of New York Insight Meditation Center. And I'm thrilled to be here with these two. Joseph is co-founder of IMS and a pillar of contemporary Buddhism. And Gail is a writer, a businesswoman, and a Buddhist practitioner for over 30 years. We're here today to share the riches in Gail's new book, which is called Creating a Life of Integrity in Conversation with Joseph Goldstein. So this book has a very interesting structure, which you'll hear more about. A book on integrity. So the timing couldn't be better, right? We're all seeing the value of integrity every day and the anguish caused by its absence. So it's an electrifying book. Gail, guided by Joseph, takes us on a deep dive into the 10 components of integrity, the Paramis. It's electrifying because the book's not simply about these qualities. It's about how to grow them for yourself. It's how to see the Paramis at play or not in your life every day. You don't just read this book. You're inspired, you're relating, you're learning from Joseph's clear instructions and Gail's bursts of insight as she goes into the world each month with a different parami to explore, wrestle with, and ultimately understand generosity or patience or loving kindness or truthfulness. She's a warrior, eager, resilient, and funny. And Joseph is wisdom offered with a light and loving touch. Beginning September 24th, Gail will be leading a monthly Zoom workshop at NYI, following the book Parami by Parami. We'll tell you more about that at the end of this conversation. We'll also take audience questions then, and you can post questions for Joseph and Gail on the chat at any point. And should you have any tech issues, post that in the Q&A panel down there. And Danya, who is the tech wizard behind the curtain of the tea, will come to your assistance. So my motto in life is, if you have Joseph Goldstein available, you ask him to lead a sit. You start things off with a sit. So Joseph, will you lead us in a sit?
Okay, be glad to. So this will be a short sitting, not more than a few hours. And that's my line. That's my opening line for a sit. So just for 5 minutes or so. Take a comfortable posture, where you're straight but not stiff or tense. Relax the eyes and the shoulders, the jaw, the belly. Relax the heart. Settle into the awareness of your sitting posture. Just sit and know you're sitting. Sometimes the use of a very simple phrase, "there is a body," is just the reminder to settle into the awareness of the body in an easy and relaxed way. As you're aware of your body posture, your sitting posture, you may also become aware of your body breathing. Breathing in, know you're breathing in. And breathing out, know you're breathing out. Just keep it that simple. Let the body breathe in its own time, in its own way. It's not a breathing exercise, but an exercise in awareness. So simply be aware of however each breath presents itself. Feeling the sensations of the air at the nostrils, or the movement of the chest or abdomen. Stay easeful, relaxed. The body knows how to breathe. If there's some predominant bodily sensation other than the breath that is calling your attention, open to the feeling of that sensation. Tightness or pressure or tingling, vibration. Simply become aware of that sensation, noticing how it changes. And again, settling back into the awareness of the breath. And stay attentive to the arising of thoughts or images in the mind. So as you're feeling the breath, the sensations, it's very likely a thought will appear or an image will appear. As soon as you become aware of that, it might be helpful to make a soft mental note, thinking or seeing. It's a way of strengthening mindfulness of thought as an object. And of particular interest, notice what happens to a thought or image in the moment that you become aware. Does it disappear? Does it fade away? Does it continue? Simply to notice. Sounds should arise, simply notice hearing, settling back into the awareness of the whole body, the body breathing.
Thank you, Joseph. So Gail, I'd love you to start us off by telling how this collaboration between you and Joseph got underway.
Um, I will. Boy, I have to say, I was so soothed. Don't you find Joseph's voice soothing? I mean, I've spent 30 years almost listening to it, and I was nervous before, and I'm like, oh, everything's fine. Everything, you really have that effect. So I'm sure I'm not alone in that. It's fun. Both these stories are in the book. And the first was the day I met Joseph. And my new boyfriend at the time, many years ago, who's now my husband, Ron, knew Joseph already, and they were good friends. So the three of us were going to go up skiing, and we're in this car, we're driving up, and I'm scared to death of being with this very famous Buddhist, and so I'm in the back seat and I'm just listening. But meanwhile, the two of them are laughing and trading jokes, and I'm starting to feel more comfortable with this renowned Buddhist. And then it was snowing, and then it was snowing more, and then there were flashing lights saying you need chains for your tires, and we had a rented car with no chains. So we pull off into this little store, and just as we're pulling off, a police car shows up behind us and is following us until we park in this thing, and I'm like, oh no, we're gonna get that ticket. But he turned out to be just fueling his car. So Ron says, I'll go talk to him and find out what we need. You guys go in and see about buying some snow tires. So we go in and we go, and Joseph goes, coffee? Want a coffee? So we go over and we get these coffees. And then he's like, cookie? You want some cookies? Remember? So we go over and we're like, we're both cookie freaks. So we're pulling cookies out, right? And then Joseph turns around and he's like, sandwiches. It says freshly made sandwiches. So we go over and we're leaning, looking at these sandwiches. And all of a sudden he straightens up and he turns to me and he says, remember what we were talking about in the car? This is wanting mind in action. and he's, pointing to his head. And I'm like, wanting mind? Not me? This is just wanting mind, This is the first I'd ever heard of something like that, of this way of holding things so lightly and so not me, mine, oh my God, Ron's out in this blizzard and here I am eating cookies. But just the mind. And it was so lighthearted. And I'm like, that was it for me. I was clear. I wanted to be doing whatever he was doing. And so 3 days later, I did my first 10-day meditation retreat with him, and that was it. And then a number of years later, I was really feeling burned out and depressed, and it was one of the crashes in real estate, which is my career. And I just didn't know what to do. I really felt I was getting seriously depressed. And so I reached out to Joseph and I said, do you do any therapy? like once a month or whatever? And he said, sure. And we could meet once a month and talk. And he says something like, and we'll work on integrity. And I'm like, is this good news or bad news? He thinks we need to work on integrity. But and the first time we met, he gave me instructions to take into my daily life for generosity. And at the end of that month, we had an appointment and met to talk about what I experienced. And after the end of the conversation that we had in the conversation with Joseph, we both looked at each other and we went, whoa, that was really good. We had a great time and we had uncovered things, at least for myself. But it had a lot of juice to it. And so we agreed we'd retape it and do it again. And then we were launched. And that's what we would do. He would give me instructions. And these instructions were to take into your daily life, not sit on a meditation cushion, which was a novelty to me in itself. And then I would report back and we would take those reports. And I think after the second one, Joseph and I both were like, oh, this is a book. And that's how it started.
Thank you.
Right?
Is that
I
right?
think Gail had the notion this is a book.
What?
I think you had the notion this might be a book.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking for more work.
Yeah. Yes, I do love to write. So,
So as a reader, the first thing that hit me about this book is I've been hearing about the Paramis for a long time. I thought they were, really nice qualities of a Buddha, the perfections of Buddha. And, that it's a nice thought, and it's something that, you should hit on as much as you can. But perfection was something not within realm. And here, this book redefines what Joseph, you redefine what a parami is. It's not just a nice quality. So
yeah, so I think this becomes an interesting point, because all of those 10 qualities that you mentioned, a few of them in the beginning, of generosity and truthfulness and patience and equanimity, concentration, all of those, just in and of themselves, they're beautiful qualities that make our lives happier. So just on that level, they're worth cultivating. But actually what makes them what is called a parami, or perfection, is when they're cultivated in the service of liberation. So it's not only kind of the mundane benefits, which we can all relate to. It feels good to be generous, and it feels good when we're more loving. But if we put it in the context of how these qualities free the mind, and basically free the mind, it's basically freeing the mind from suffering in understanding the causes of suffering, which is attachment and clinging and grasping. So then when we cultivate these qualities in our lives, as Gail said, it's not just something to do on the meditation cushion. If we cultivate the qualities with the understanding of how they're freeing our minds from clinging and grasping, how they serve that higher aim, then we're getting the value on both levels. In the more mundane ease of our lives, but it's also really powering, our path towards greater freedom. So they have tremendous power.
Yeah, and empowering in terms of motivation. When I kind of recognize that, there could be an uprooting of greed,
Yeah.
for being generous. It's not just, can I afford this, or uprooting greed. It really does something to your motivation, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And so an interesting point here also is, as we work with them, and generosity is a good example of this, if we have an impulse to be generous, and we're looking at our minds and trying to understand, yes, this will actually not only help the other person, but be weakening the force of greed in my own mind. But then we might also find a lot of mixed motivations, where, oh, it'll make me look good, or something will come back to me, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it could be that people would get discouraged at first if they see all those mixed motivations, and then maybe back off from doing anything. What I found, and this is all the beauty of the practice, it's exploration. It's an investigation of our own minds. What I saw was that, yeah, there may be mixed motivations, but if I see them, I can just let the more unskillful ones pass through, and then commit, one might say, or re-energize the actual initial wholesome impulse. So we don't have to be discouraged by the fact that we may see mixed motivations. That's just something else to become aware of, and then attuning to what is most wholesome. So it's a beautiful practice.
It is. I'm remembering Gail's, when you said in the book, that's just, something else to notice. And you went,
yeah. It's so great to have him continually reminding me of that through this teachings, because of course I wasn't thinking that.
Of course, and it seems like,
oh
yeah, and I think there's such a tendency to take the worst motive as the true one, you know, and you're not going there. You're saying, no, that's no more true. You know, I'm just wondering, it's like you're saying you're not looking for your real self in this. You're not looking for, you know, you are, right? Isn't that what makes the difference in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it really, on a deeper level of understanding, the self has nothing to do with it. Because, you know, people familiar with the Buddhist
Right.
teachings will be, at least, have recognized the teaching on non-self. You know, so there's no one there in the first place on that level.
Right.
And it's much more easeful when we realize, yes, it's simply a question of cultivating wholesome states of heart and mind.
Right.
And wholesome means that which brings about happiness or peace, and letting go or diminishing the unwholesome states. So it doesn't have to refer to self at all in that. We're just seeing how these different mind states function in our lives. Some bring happiness, some bring suffering. Which would you like? You know?
And one of the things Joseph does so incredibly in these for each parami is we get this delightful list of instructions, but they're not. It's really a gem of taking the ancient teachings and making them apply to walking down the street with the homeless people. And what do you do with it? You know, it's like he's really made it present now. And he also, his instructions are like, I'm going to read you a couple of instructions that just from the first one, generosity, so that you get a sense that they're not what you think instructions from Joseph would look like.
Great.
Watch closely for the mixed motivations. Each time you have the thought to give arise, act on it. Then notice what happens. Remember, awareness doesn't have to be grim. Just push the edge. Remember, the practice is to investigate, not judge. Ask, what just happened here? Watch for the pure versus not so pure motivations. Just simply act on it takes you over that hump. And remember, not either or, just mixed. Is that great? That's not even all the instructions for generosity. It's off the cushion in the world working with this. And I would write those instructions down and take them with me. And I'd sit them up on my desk, so I would try to be more whatever with people who would walk into my office. And just continually start again. That's something that I haven't heard talked about as much as this book and these instructions that he's come up with too.
I know. So let's go to your going into the streets of San Francisco, confronting, aware of, your purpose is to see how you respond to people in the streets of San Francisco who are asking for money, which seems so dangerous to me, you know, to like go into the world basically with an open wallet with people who have no money. And yet you did that, Gail. So, and you were aware, you know, so how did the parami come into play there?
It's funny you say that because I never thought of that. I guess I've just been around it too long. I don't even think of it as being dangerous. So I don't really know how to respond to that, but I certainly had a lot of responses. And one of the most debilitating things for me to see was that, gosh, if my shoe hurt, I felt less generous. I mean, you know, it's like, if you're really watching every moment, and then I'd for my commute, I would take the ferry into San Francisco from where I live, and then I would walk quite a distance to my office. So, and, you know, there's just one homeless person after another. And so I'd find myself thinking, well, he looks like he could get a job, or, you know, it's just like, and then I'd like, oh, Gail, come on, we're working on generosity. And so then I'd, you know, give out, and the first few times, you're right, I opened my wallet and I had $20 bill in there, and I was going to give him a one, and the guy peers over and says, that 20 would really be helpful. So there goes my 20. So I went to the bank and I filled my purse with $1 bills. And I found after a while that then I kind of went the other way, where Joseph says, when you do this, you want to come from that place of giving, of pureness, of really generous feeling. Not because it's going to make me feel happy. Well, it started making me feel happy. I'd get to the end of the street to my office and I'd just be like, and I'd have little conversations here and there, and I'd give them their $1 bill or two, or, you know, whatever. And I'd get to the end. And finally I realized that I was doing it because I enjoyed it. And then I was worried that maybe that was not a proper motivation. But I had, really quick, near the end of that month, I had an experience that took me much deeper than I had been in all of the passing out of money, and understanding how one can be generous. And I was so happy. I had a day off and I was going for an appointment, and I was having lunch outside, and, you know, in one of the little restaurants that have outside eating. And I brought my food and I was walking out with a tray, and I was holding it, and this woman came up to me and she said, can I ask you a question? And I said, sure. And I set my tray down and she sat down at my table. And I was just looking forward to this nice, you know, half hour by myself in the sun, you know, and she's sitting at my table, and I have no idea how to extricate myself from that, you know, and she's clearly homeless, and she's kind of dirty, and, you know, she has this bag, and, you know, like they do. So I'm like, okay, this is generosity, and this is the truth. This is generosity month. And, you know, so I had all these thoughts, and I sat down at the table with her. And over the course of almost an hour, it was one of the most moving experiences of my life, to slowly get to know this woman. She just wanted to be seen. She just wanted to sit at the table. All the people at the other tables were looking at me like I was, you know, a freak, which they probably thought I was. But she just, and like when the guy came over to give her a drink, you know, I had her order and we had lunch and the whole thing, just the way the waiter handled her. And she said, could I have a straw, please? And he just kind of walked away, and I go, could you please bring her a straw? You know, it's hard to imagine, but, and I was just like, and she didn't want money. She wanted connection. And I learned how she got there, and what, you know, all of that. And so I think the other thing, one of the things about generosity, is that there's so many ways to be generous. Joseph opens it up in a way that you just never considered. I never would have done that. I would have gone to another table and just ignored her. I mean, that's how this work has profound effects.
Yeah. So Joseph, I was wondering what you were thinking when Gail was saying that, you know, maybe she was doing it with the wrong motivation because she was enjoying it so much. What were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that there's nothing wrong with the enjoyment of the good feelings that come from wholesome states of mind, you know, because in a way it reinforces that. But it's a question of whether we limit our motivation to that, or we see, oh yes, this is a byproduct, but actually in doing this, you know, I'm cultivating other qualities leading to liberation, like letting go, or like the heart connection of loving kindness that takes us outside of ourselves.
Yeah.
So the good feeling is fine, and they will come because it does feel good, you know, as these qualities get stronger. But they're much more impactful than simply making us feel good. And I think we want to open up to the greater transformation that's going on as we practice them.
Yeah. Just on that note, you have a quote in the book. The challenge is understanding that all these states do bring benefit, but that is not the motivation for doing it, which seems so counterintuitive. There's appreciation of the wholesome action, but not the benefit to you, the happiness of virtue, even the bliss of blamelessness. It's about the purification of mind and really seeing the non-grasping. Our practice is discerning the difference.
Yeah. So I have this a little story from my own practice, which really illustrates that.
Yeah.
I saw it so clearly. So this was a time I was in Burma and doing intensive loving kindness practice, which is its own kind of meditation. So I was doing this for a couple of months, all day, every day, just repeating the phrases, of loving care, loving kindness. And I noticed that what my mind would be doing would be always checking, am I getting more loving? Am I more loving it? Am I getting more concentrated? Whereas really the loving kindness practice is wishing well for another, and so when am I getting more loving yet? That had nothing to do actually with loving kindness.
Yes.
That was just my own selfish wanting. And it became so clear, the difference between checking, my own state, and then dropping back into just this very simple wish for another to be happy, And when I was checking myself, of course, that was no longer the cultivation of loving kindness.
Right.
And so that's the kind of discernment that's so helpful in our practice, because until we're fully awakened, there's going to always be a lot of mixture, of qualities and motivation and all of that. So that's just natural and par for the course. It's whether we're interested in seeing all that and taking an interest, because then we can choose, okay, well, let me give emphasis to this side rather than that side.
I'm just listening and watching the laughter with which you greet your own, measuring. And there's another quote about, if we practice with the right attitude, this becomes a game. And it's what Gail was talking about too, so that rather than hitting ourselves, I think of, those chains, when we fail, when we make mistakes, and I think about, I think, I don't know if it's Western culture, but many people are very hard on themselves, just like that, and believe the worst about themselves. And so you say, so the right attitude, it's a practice. It's understanding that here is where freedom lies. That we're you said we are seeing it more on the playing field of freedom, rather than life or death, or it's like what Gail was saying, those lists that she would carry around. And I'm thinking of your repeated saying, well, how do you do that? With a gentle touch, beginning again. When when you give up, don't give up on yourself, but when you do, begin again. So I'm thinking that's so different. It's such a different way of responding. And I'm thinking you couldn't have grown up with that, because you just couldn't have. So where does that come from in you? Is it the practice?
It's definitely the practice. When I first began my practice, I was incredibly self-judgmental. I would see all these unwholesome states in my mind, and I'd actually be running to my teacher, Manindra, basically saying how bad I was, because I was seeing really for the first time with clarity, kind of all the negative aspects of what was going on in my mind. And it took a while. It took a lot of sitting and just watching my mind and seeing both the impermanence of all that, seeing that there was a choice. You know, I didn't have to glom onto them, seeing how they would come and go. And over time, there really came a great lightness. Because when we've seen the same stupid pattern for the 10 millionth time, one starts to smile, you know? And so maybe having that prompt in the beginning would help us get there before the 10 millionth time. You know, maybe after 100 times we begin to smile.
You know, Gail quotes you as saying, all the moral precepts are rules for training, not commandments.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, so I wanted to ask both of you, of the 10 paramis, you know, so let's say they're a team. So for each of you, which would you say was the MVP? You want to start, Gail?
Yes, you already know the answer to this one. Virya. Something about that one reminds me that, you know, it takes courage, is Virya's definition. And it's one of the paramis. And it comes after wisdom, which I always love, because it's a good idea to get wise first before you go out with all that Virya. But, you know, I never thought you could train in and get better at these things, generosity or, you know, renunciation, not my strong suit. And the idea that all you have to do is be present, have these wonderful instructions, and then, you know, like, and, you know, some virya. And the other thing that Joseph pointed out and points out is that these ancient teachings, they start and they have like a set of stairs, and they have a relationship to each other. So like I say, you know, you want to have wisdom before you have, you know, the virya energy, the courage, or, you know, you might slay the wrong enemy. But each one builds on itself also. And so that it becomes clearer and easier, and it's like this wonderful symphony of all of these factors in you working together. And so, yeah, you know, that was really an important part for me to see that it was something that you just become increasingly aware of.
So reading the book, I see that virya, the courage, energy, perseverance, determination, whatever the, you know, it's many definitions. And I see that as the root of the resilience, you know, that is so strengthening, invigorating, and makes this trip with you so joyous.
Thank you.
So Joseph, what's your MVP?
Probably when I look back over, you know, all these years, I think it's the interest aspect of wisdom, you know, that kind of investigation aspect, because even from the very beginning, I was just really interested in how my mind was working, you know, and just to see what created suffering and, you know, what led to more peace. And that interest in my own mind, my own heart, really has fueled all these years of practice, because it's endlessly fascinating. You know, the Dharma is vast, you know, and what we can learn about our minds is vast. So just as an example of that, now, you know, we all go through times, situations where the mind is suffering for one reason or another. And now, after these many years of practice, it's usually it's not perfect yet, but usually my first response when I'm in a situation of some distress or some kind of suffering, I just get really interested in wanting to understand, okay, what's happening in my mind that's creating the suffering? Because the world can be the cause of a lot of difficult situations in our lives, but how we relate to them is totally up to us. You know, and so if we're lost in kind of a blaming mode on other people or the world for the suffering we're in, we're actually giving up our power. You know, as if these external situations have the power to make us suffer. They do have the power to create conditions in our lives, that's for sure, you know, but then how we relate to them, that is totally within our own agency. So it's tremendously empowering and then interesting to really see, okay,
Yeah.
you know, what's my mind doing
Yeah.
that's creating this suffering right now? And it's been really illuminating.
You know, I'm thinking about this in relation to renunciation, which sounds like such a drag, you know, hair shirts, deprivation, and, you know, in the context of what you're saying and, you know, reading Gail's experiences, Gail, do you want to just talk a little bit about the shopping renunciation?
Yes, I'm not telling any family secrets, Joseph, right? Joseph and I share a love for working with generosity and also renunciation. And the, I guess the best way to describe it is that it's like, I remember when I was working renunciation and I just, there's underneath it for me, this feeling of I deserve it. You know, I'd had a hard day at the office. I was going to the opera, my, you know, big thing I love. I could have a glass of champagne. I earned that glass of champagne with my opera, but I had given up alcohol for the month under Joseph's watch while I was working with renunciation. And so, and I sat there in the opera and I didn't even, I felt so lousy. I just, you know, I didn't want to drink it, but I was there, but, you know, I would like it. And slowly for me, understanding and really experiencing where the suffering was coming from. It wasn't suffering from not allowing myself that glass of champagne. It was buying this glass of champagne when I had set out to do something different. And there's a lot of suffering in our, you know, we do that all day long, right? We think we know what we need to do. We think we're going to do this or that, you know, this person needs this. And then when we don't do it, we feel lousy. And that, so renunciation was a big part of there. You know, it starts out being denying yourself and ends up being enriching yourself.
Yeah. So there were a couple of times when you vowed not to buy anything except to replenish basics for a month, and you reach a point where you're driving by a mall and realize you want to take that away.
Yeah, I'm driving home from work and it's, you know, I worked really hard and it's dark and it's late and I'm driving by the big shopping center in our area and it's of course all lit up. It's long before these days, all lit up, you know, and beguiling, you know, come, I have something for you. You wanted for all your life, you know. And I'm driving. No, I'm not buying anything this month, you know. And then I noticed there was like, and I think, you know what? I had no interest in going in there. I was looking forward to going home and just relaxing. And it was like, oh, that was kind of the first time I noticed the pull, that it's like a weight, that that wanting.
Yeah.
Really is. It's it's
know,
a hard one.
And Joseph asked you how you felt, and you said relief.
Big relief. It was like,
yeah. So that
somebody took the, you know, the lid off, and I just floated on home.
You know, there's a simple reframe for renunciation that I found really helpful, because also I don't think that's my strong point either. But I've been, you know, working with it in various ways. And one of the really helpful turning points was when I reframed renunciation into the understanding of it being non-addiction. You know, because in renunciation, just the word, it feels like we're giving something up. So it kind of has a connotation, could have a connotation of deprivation.
Yes.
Whereas when I framed it as non-addiction, the connotation was freedom. And so it became much more inspiring, to actually practice it, because in the renunciation, just as Gail just described, there is this greater freedom, greater openness, but we're beguiled by whatever it is, that's tempting us. And we're not seeing the quality, just as Gail described, the quality in our minds, the contraction of the wanting, and then the freedom of just letting it go, of not being addicted to the wanting. And like everything else, the wantings come and go. We don't have to give expression to it. It's going to go by itself.
It's so true. It really is. And you couldn't have told me that. I had to experience it for myself.
Well,
That's what this is all about. Taking this in trying it. Like, okay, I'm not supposed to do it, but oh wow, this is great.
There's another line that popped up a few times about it's valuable to say no without aversion. To say no with the understanding that I don't have to do this, as in compelled. I'm not compelled. And then this is the part I really love. And we do this with as much freedom in the no as there is in the yes. And it's an amazing thought, if you've ever
it really is
subject to addiction.
So tied into this, I think, which is another quality which I've just found so helpful, both in my own practice and in teaching. It's tremendously helpful to have a sense of humor about one's own mind.
That's the 11th Paramis.
Right, the 11th Paramis is a sense of humor. So on one retreat, a meditator came in and they had this big insight, which they were sharing with me, and it was a great expression. They said, I discovered the mind has no pride. Meaning it'll do anything. It'll toss up lots and lots of stuff. Some really beautiful stuff and some that are not so beautiful. If we can have a sense of humor about it all and just watch it as the play of the mind, then it makes it easier to make wiser choices. If we don't have a sense of humor and are taking it, overly seriously, that's in a subtle kind of way, it's just reinforcing the sense of self in it all. And
this
so
reminds me of the jaw story, the tight jaws. You want to tell that?
So this was on a retreat actually in Australia. This meditator came in and said, he was feeling tightness in his jaw, and then he went on this long self-judgment, and this means I'm so uptight and I'm just a terrible person, and it just went on and on in this elaboration. And I kept saying, you mean you have a tight jaw? And then, but that means that I'm this kind of person and I'm never going to be successful. Oh, this means you have tightness in your jaw. And it took a while for him to just settle into the feeling of the sensation. It's an unpleasant sensation. That's okay. It's not a problem.
I want to ask you I want to ask you two more things. So one is the idea of onward leading that Gail says Joseph's suggestions for inquiring into motivation is to ask, is this onward leading? So that seems like a newish phrase to me. I don't know that it goes back hundreds of years the way we do, Is that new for you? And it does, and tell me exactly what it means.
I'll be interested to hear how Gail interpreted it.
I'm trying to remember that one offhand.
But just the question.
I can jump in.
I know. I'm just.
Okay.
You can go.
So basically, it's very simple. It kind of means exactly what it says. Is it onward leading in the sense of leading to greater happiness, leading to greater peace? leading to the development of these qualities? Or are we just going around in circles or actually regressing into more unwholesome patterns? So there is a trajectory to all of this.
Yes.
And I think that's really important. And it's not a straight line going up. It's more like a sine curve. There's a lot of ups and downs in the course of our practice and in our lives and the practice of these paramis.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's easy and we get a lot of insight with it. Sometimes we're struggling with it, but it's onward leading if we persevere, because it's leading to greater fulfillment of them.
So I assumed it meant onward leading, and after reading, this distinction in the paramis between just nice qualities and paramis, it's leading in the direction of freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the antithesis, because in the book, Gail mentions that you stop, you don't go along with thoughts that lead to suffering. So I'm saying these are, it's like a choice, like, is this thought leading to suffering? If not now.
Yeah.
So again, the idea that we have choices over our thoughts, that we have choices over our motives. I mean, so you're talking about playing in the field of freedom, and this is creating a field of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to tweak one thing you said. It's not that we have a choice over what thoughts arise.
Right.
Oh.
We have a choice about which thoughts we act on.
Right.
And so that's where the interest and the discernment comes.
Yeah.
We don't invite our thoughts. They just come.
We don't.
Yeah.
Really
But the
don't.
mindfulness kind of gives us the space.
Which we encourage and go round and around and around.
Absolutely.
So, and again, I think there's a predisposition to think that those negative, those downward leading, backward leading thoughts are probably the truer ones. So I see we have about 6 minutes left. I'm wondering if either of you have something you want to add. I have one other question. I have a million other questions. But you say in your preface, Joseph, we both learned a lot from this project. So I think the book is what Gail learned and will share with us. And I wonder, what would you say you learned?
Well, I learned everything she learned when she reported it back to me. but also because there was no, other than the framework of the 10 paramis themselves, there was no curriculum of teachings in my mind. So the conversations were very spontaneous. Yeah. And it was interesting to me as we would discuss it and Gail would report on her experiences, for me just to see what came out, from my own mind and from my own experience. So in that way, it was very creative and spontaneous, and just seeing what emerged from all the years of practice when it was, applied to these real life situations. So that's a beautiful part of these Dharma interactions and conversations. We learn a lot just in the process. It's a creative process.
Yeah. He's saying he made me the guinea pig.
Exactly.
So that's, as I said, I discovered that these were practices, and I discovered it because they hadn't existed before as practices. So that's, I was saying to you earlier, it's like reading this and seeing that they're practices. It was such, it was suddenly like going from, I don't know, working with twigs to build something to having power tools. It's like, oh, so meditation for the rest of my life it's not just going to be one breath after another. It is really this mammoth open field of exploration where every moment is offering some insight and some opening to grow in wisdom and freedom. Yeah,
and it's so true that it's like this process, and you find yourself like you and I were chatting a few days ago, that even little things like I had a phone call from a friend and they wanted to, you know, if I was available to the next night, and I look in my calendar and it's empty, and I would normally say, and I was really feeling like I needed some time, you know, just quiet time. And so I would normally say, you know, oh, I've got something booked, you know, on that. How does next week look? And I couldn't do it. I was like, I had to say, you know, I am free tomorrow, but I've been looking forward to that night all week long because it's the only one I have free. How does your week look next week? And she said, oh, great. Okay, let's, you know, I mean, it took me this whole process to be able to do that, but it was huge. I have not done it again. I mean, and I think what was so profound for me was it's all this little stuff that you have no idea is causing you suffering. That's why it's a path to peace. But we make these little decisions, you know, every day, all day long, because we just don't see them. And this is what the beauty of this was, these instructions that you would take in, so in your daily life. It's not like, you know, I would wake up in the morning and I sit and I'm just feeling great. And then I can't even get out the front door and I've already, you know, this happened and that happened and that, you know, and okay, I'll just try again tomorrow, you know. But this is, no, you just try again now and then with the next breath. It's with you. They're with you all the time. And just, it just keeps opening and opening, and there's so much joy that comes out of it. Because you know when you know, I hang up the phone and go, gosh darn it. I wasn't even aware I was lying, you know. It was just like one of those things I've always done. I'm like, wow, I was about to lie and I caught myself and it worked. So it's such a revelation.
Yeah. So at this point, I want to just say one thing. We're going to open to questions in just a minute, but I just want to say that what you're saying about the course, because I've been waiting for the course to begin to actually spend a month on generosity. So I just wanted to invite everybody out there to consider signing up and joining this sangha that will be created. And as I said, you know, it's interesting and it's scary to embark on such a big job as creating a life of integrity. But you know, if Joseph once said, it is a free fall, but there's no ground. So there's no smack, there's no cudgel here. There's learning how to meet what you think of as mistakes and how to grow from them, and how they open doorways to wisdom. And I think about a famous story of Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, who said to the Buddha one day, "So Lord, the sangha, the community, is half the noble life, isn't it?" And the Buddha said, "Oh no, Ananda, don't say that. Don't say that. It's the whole of the noble life." So for me, what is sustaining and encouraging and will keep me at this generosity for a month, etc., is signing up for the course, creating a life of integrity, creating a sangha with Gail, and I hope to see many of you there. We're posting now the link for it. You will all get follow-up emails of how to register, and let's open to questions. Donna, if you're listening.
Yeah, we've got a lot of really wonderful questions, so get to as many as we can. I'll start out with a couple of questions on generosity. So Jessie asks, how can we be truly generous without giving to every worthy cause or person who needs help? It feels like however much I give, there's always more that could be done, which makes it feel like I'm not being generous enough.
Well, okay. I'll take a stab, because I certainly had to work with that. I never had as much cash as was asked of me as I walked down the streets. But if, and the way I worked with it was I knew what I had, and that's what I would give away. And if it weren't walking on the streets, which makes me sound like I'm a streetwalker, in other things, you know, as you ask these questions and you go about and you're just, it's really an investigation is what's so fun. I always felt like I had these secret instructions and I was, you know, trying out these things. And yourself speaks to yourself. You get a sense of where you want to and where you don't. And that's what this whole thing is about, is really fine-tuning that, opening that communication with your heart and your strongest things that you really feel are important. And so it's a process, and I found that happened pretty quickly. I was pretty clear after a while that it was just pretty much, if anyone's asking, this I learned from Joseph, he says this quite often, if anyone's asking, I give. And that served me well, to get over the hump of,
You know, another way to kind of, it's an interesting question, because I think that's a challenge for all of us. Yeah. You know, how much of what we have do we give away? You know, and I think, as Gail said, we just find what works for us, but may also be stretching us a little bit, you know, so we don't have to stay completely in our comfort zone. And also, we don't have to go crazy with it, you know. And the Dalai Lama said something, and it really points to what's underneath generosity, which is a basic feeling of kindness. You know, we're responding generously because of a certain quality of kindness within us, you know, and caring. And so what His Holiness said was, be kind whenever possible. It's always possible. So it's always possible to be kind, and then to find the appropriate expression of that kindness, just depending on our circumstances and what feels appropriate, you know, at that particular time, with building in a little stretch component, you know, because we want to expand our capacity as well. But I think rooting it in that feeling of kindness, which even if we don't give, for whatever reason, we can still be kind rather than annoyed. You know?
Thank you.
That's wonderful. And that kind of hints at the next question, which is about the cultivating discernment in the act of generosity. So for example, Rebecca asks, I'm wondering about the idea of idiot compassion that I've heard discussed in Buddhism. How do we engage this practice of taking our compassionate generosity to the street without becoming enablers of behaviors that are promoting suffering? So if I give someone $1 and they use it to buy the next fix, that's not really good or truly compassionate. So how do you, Gail, for example, in your process, cultivate discernment in the act of generosity?
I did. The very first time, the first day, my first venture out with my new instructions on generosity, I was walking to lunch by myself, and a homeless person stopped me, and so I opened up my wallet to give him some money, and all I had was the 20, and I was going to give, I was reaching for the 1, and he said, oh, $20, you know, my friend just got really sick, and I want to take the bus up to, you know, somewhere and visit him, you know. And so I, you know, gave him the 20, and then I was really new at this, and I got back to my desk after lunch, and I thought, oh, he's probably sitting out on the street now with his buddies, and they're drinking, you know, the $20 to buy some, you know, a lot of booze. And, you know, I fell for it. But I felt good. I had this conversation with him, and that was the next thing to come up. But, you know, we had a nice exchange, and I don't really care what he does with the $20 he asked me, you know. And so I think that it's that, I think we know And it's always just, if asked, give. And that works for me. And Joseph taught me that, and it really does. I mean, sometimes you just know, but that whole rating and stuff, it's hard. It was hard for me either to be rating people or just give it all up. I couldn't find a really easy medium, middle road. Sorry, that wasn't quite as good as but I think that's one of the ways, right, Joseph? It's how, yeah, how you deal with it moment to moment, it changes.
Yeah, and I think what you learned from that about yourself and generosity resonates with me as well. I mean, obviously, when you know that somebody is going to be doing something harmful with it, so that's one thing. But in circumstances where you don't know, and somebody's clearly in a place of some deprivation and is asking. And we give, we respond to it in some kind and generous way. Yeah, it's just trusting one's own impulse. Yeah, and then things will be. It's like, well, I'll back up for a moment because my first teacher, his name was Munindraji. He gave me one piece of advice early on, which just has saved me so much suffering in my life. He said, you can't take responsibility for other people's minds. You can take responsibility for your own, and so we don't have control over what other people will think or do, but we can take responsibility for the quality of our own hearts, and our own minds. And so that's what this practice is about. It's not so much about saving the world. It's just about putting out these very beautiful qualities, cultivating them in ourselves, and seeing the effect, in ourselves and the world we live in.
Okay, so that.
I guess one other thing, in undertaking all of this, we shouldn't be afraid to make mistakes. Maybe we'll do something and we'll be generous, and then something will be revealed to us that said, oh no, that was not so wise. Well, it's okay. So then we've actually learned from that. So we shouldn't hold ourselves back because we're afraid we may make a mistake in a certain situation. If the impulse is good, if the motivation is good.
Thank you. So that gets into a couple questions about applying the paramis as we witness and experience present societal challenges and disaster, and also what our role is in this very individual work of paramis, how that connects to the larger societal problems that we're facing, and what is our responsibility in this direction.
Okay, I'll just jump in as one of the paramis is loving kindness, but a component of loving kindness is really compassion. It's like when we're feeling kindness, let's say, loving kindness, in a situation of suffering, so then that feeling of loving kindness then manifests as compassion. And the phrase that I love for compassion practice, very simple, and this would, I don't know, we talked about this as one of the instructions, with the loving kindness scale, but just the expression, how can I help? How can I help? So that almost becomes one's koan, or a little mantra of love and compassion. So it really is the cultivation of that particular parami in response to how we engage with the world, where there is so much suffering, and to go through life or each of the situations, well, how can I help in this situation? And sometimes it'll be something obvious, and sometimes maybe we realize there's nothing I can do, and that's when we cultivate the parami of equanimity.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it feels so much clearer to me now. It doesn't feel like a decision. has to be made. It kind of comes up naturally of what I can do. Oftentimes talking with someone is really something they're needing, or giving of money. I do feel like this training allows us to be so much more quickly and more deeply in touch with what's right for your heart. You're just so much more in communication with your heart, and as a result, and it's remarkable. If you just relax, like with the woman at the in the restaurant, she just was feeling, she had been a normal person and lost it with drugs and was trying to claw her way back, and she wanted to sit at a table with me and with other people around and just have a conversation. That's what all she wanted. And it was something I could give that I wouldn't have given before I started this work. I would have felt a gazillion things going on in my head. So I like Joseph saying, it's something that it's individual, and it just becomes clear. I think if we all are working with this and in this way, it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly what we need to do.
Okay, Marvin asks, the Dharma is vast, and we have the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, 3 Refuges, 4 Measurables, and here are the 10 Paramis. How do you see the Paramis fitting into a wider Buddhist practice? At what stage of life or of Buddhist practice should one turn to the Paramis? Or are the Paramis fundamental to the other components of Buddhist practice?
I think they are fundamental, and it's quite true that, in the way the Buddhist teachings are presented, there are a lot of lists. And I think that in one way, it was expressed that way because in the beginning it was an oral tradition. Nothing was written down. And it's almost a mnemonic device, to categorize things in a very systematic way so they could be easily remembered and recited and repeated. So I think that's where that particular format came from. And it does help, because instead of it being kind of a confused mess of a lot of different teachings and, maybe difficult to sort it all out, kind of the different lists really articulate in very clear ways specific qualities or specific characteristics that we're working on. And as you go deeper into all the teachings, I think that you'll find that they all reflect each other. So that within the Four Noble Truths, you could find all the paramis, because it really is, the Four Noble Truths are about suffering and the end of suffering. And that's really what the paramis are about. So they all come together. They're not in conflict in any way, and they're actually just different expressions of each other.
All right. Does awakening or enlightenment mean not having the wanting, or does the wanting continue to come and go, but you are no longer addicted to it? Does the wanting diminish as one approaches enlightenment?
Well, I don't know about how close I am to enlightenment, but I will say that the wanting has already significantly diminished for myself, amazingly so. And I understand how much the wanting comes from wanting. Like wanting something is coming from a wanting, but it's not for something, it's just wanting. And if we can pay attention to that and kind of go deeper with that, oftentimes it's wanting something totally different than a new blouse, or it's wanting to take a retreat or to join a group, and your heart's yearning, and it's not always the what you think it is.
One clarification here may be, one of the problems that the question really elucidated was that in English, the word wanting can mean many different things.
Mhm.
Whereas in the Pali language, which is the language of the original Buddhist teachings, there are different words for different kinds of wanting. So just as an example, there's the wanting of greed, you know, where there's really grasping and clinging. There's the wanting of motivation, you know, maybe a wanting to become more compassionate, or wanting to awaken, or to be more generous, whatever it is. Well, that wanting refers to a very different mind state than the wanting of greed. But it gets confusing in English because words like wanting or desire have this range of meanings, and we often conflate them all. You know, and we think, in talking about letting go of desire or letting go of wanting, it's not all kinds of desire or all kinds of wanting. It's really letting go of those kinds of wanting that cause suffering, like greed, you know, that kind of obsessive clinging or grasping or something. So it's just helpful to kind of unpack what the word wanting means in a particular situation.
That's good.
Thank you. Gail, this question will be for you about the course. Is a large part of the course spending time practicing each parami with specific instructions?
The course is as Joseph created it spontaneously. And how it will happen is that first we will have use the instructions for each of the paramis. So we'll introduce the instructions. And then everyone will take them into their daily life for a month. The first parami, the second parami, the third. And then, as I did with Joseph, come back and report and share. And I have to tell you, I've been part of a few groups that have happened around it, and it's just magic to hear the stories when people come back, telling about, you know, their experiences with each of the paramis and sharing them. And then you get instructions for the next month, and you take those instructions into your daily life. So the class will be organized where you'll receive the instructions and you'll take them into daily life. And then when you come back, we'll divide up into groups so that we can have sharing in the groups depending on, you know, how many people. And then we'll also then receive the instructions for the next month. And then you'll take those instructions with you in your daily life. So I think it's that combination of having to report or to share or to hear what other people have discovered, just like we're doing today, is really important. I mean, it gets you excited to start the next one and try those instructions, and you get better at, you know, remembering them over the course of a day. Sometimes once I forgot a whole week. Oh yeah, I'm in such and such a month. So that's what the training is really great. It was what both Joseph and I, where we found so much enjoyment, was this, you know, the great instructions he would give for daily life. And then, you know, sharing those results in a month, and getting feedback on that, and then moving on. So that's how we've designed the courses, is just as we did it.
All right, I've got another question for Joseph about your Parami MVP. Wendy asks, how do I cultivate more interest?
So there are two things that come to mind. One is close attention, you know. So I know that many of you probably have heard of Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt psychology. He was big back in the 60s and 70s. He had a wonderful definition of boredom. You know, usually we think situations or people are boring, you know, but what he said was boredom is lack of attention. And I really found this to be true, and it was verified in the meditation practice. So just as an example, you know, on retreat, we often teach a walking meditation where people just walk back and forth quite slowly, feeling the sensations in the foot or leg of each step. And so on retreat, you see all these people walking off, often said to look like zombies, you know, just walking very slowly back and forth. So from a conventional point of view, there's nothing in the world that could be more boring. You know, it's just to walking 10 steps or 20 steps back and forth for half an hour and an hour. Yeah, it seems torturous. And yet, when people are doing the practice and are actually paying close attention to the feeling, they're really feeling it closely. You know, the micro sensations involved in taking a step, it creates this tremendous interest. It's not boring at all. And people can walk for half an hour or an hour and be totally engaged. Because boredom is not in the activity or in the person, it's in lack of attention, you know. So remembering that as a way of generating interest when you're feeling disinterested, you know, or feeling, you know, disinterested or bored, whatever it is that you choose to pay attention to, come in very close, you know, and really see the details. So that's one kind of aspect to keep in mind. The other, which is probably even more fundamental than that, you know, very often when the Buddha was asked what he teaches, he said he just teaches one thing. He teaches suffering and the end of suffering. So all of the practices, everything we do, you know, on this path, whether it's the Paramis or a meditation retreat or whatever, it's really to understand the suffering in our lives and to see that there's a way to free ourselves from that, to come out of the suffering. So when we apply that framework to our own life, that's very engaging. You know, when we're really taking our life as sometimes I think of the whole practice, it's as if we're artists and the medium of our art is our life. You know, we're fashioning a life in whatever values that we feel are important, you know, or valuable for us. And so when we see our life in that way, then it gets very interesting to explore all this. You know, both kind of in more formal practice, but as Gail, you know, she did a beautiful job with this book. You know, we were just talking, so that was the easy part. But actually, you know, getting it in written form with the clarity and the depth and the enthusiasm, so it was really beautifully done. And it illustrates, you know, how we can take interest in just the daily activities of our lives in a profound way, not in a superficial way.
All right, so we're getting close to the end. I have two more questions. One is, what is one empowering question to ask oneself when suffering?
You know what I do? At least it changes all the time, because I get stuck in little areas, and I go, I just say, what else is happening here? And that really helps me to, like, oh, well, let's try this channel, you know, and then we can look back on that channel. But just that simple, what else is happening here? Sometimes we just get so stuck in, you know. So what about you, Joseph?
Well, the question that comes very frequently to mind when a mind is distressed in some way is, what is my mind doing that's creating this distress? Because there is a cause for it. It's not coming uncaused. You know, there's something we're doing in our minds. We're either averse to something, or we're holding on to something, you know, pushing away, whatever. We're doing something in our minds in a particular situation that is causing that suffering. But often we're not aware of what we're doing. We're just lost in the suffering, kind of drowning in it. So to actually, right in the midst of the suffering, to look into that in terms of how our mind is relating to whatever the experience may be. You know, it might be experience of loss, or it might be not getting what we want, or somebody is behaving in a difficult way. And we're responding, our response is in a way that's causing us suffering. That gets really interesting. You know, what is my mind doing? How is it relating to this? That is the cause of that. So that this is where that quality of interest is really so powerful. We're taking an interest in our own minds, in our own experience, in our own lives.
And then if my mind will not have the interest and say, I'm miserable here. What's it, you know, I need to like coax it or let it rest for a minute, or, you know, like that wouldn't work for me in the moments that are at least my first reaction. It would be like, oh, no, I you know, I already told you I'm miserable here, you know. So anyway, but yeah, it's great. That's what was so wonderful about this duo over the year, is that we each kind of see different sides and different things, and that's why the groups are great. When you're having those discussions, you're like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? You know, someone else will say. So it's so fascinating to you know, like working out at a gym with other people, you know, working out. It's the same thing, only we're working out our minds. So yeah, that was interesting, because I'm like, no, that wouldn't work for me.
So that just points to a basic mantra that I use with respect to a lot of these questions. You know, whatever works. You know, and so
Yeah.
and that becomes its own investigation.
Yeah.
You know, to see, okay, in this situation, for me, what works at this time? You know, and so that opens up a, you know, big fields of investigation. Yeah.
So there are so many more questions, and I encourage everyone to bring them to the year-long course so that they can continue being worked on as a group. But the last one I'll ask Gail, so people know, is this course for mainly advanced practitioners, or can a beginner like myself benefit without feeling overwhelmed?
It is definitely, it's for everyone, but at least what I've been, people I've been talking with are all beginners to Buddhism as well. And this is something, you know, they're pretty clear they're never going to get to a retreat, or at least that's what they think now. And you know, and they can't meditate, they just, you know, but this they can grasp. So the few groups that I know, they're people that it's only because they know me and I wrote the book that they would ever even take this. You know, these are people in business that I know, but it works for that. It works because it's stuff in your everyday life, and it's not like you're, you know, doing something that they don't feel they're good at. So I think that that is what is the magic about doing the course around the with a group. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it's open to everyone.
Okay. So
all right, I turn it back to you, Amy.
Thank you, Danya. Thank you, Gail and Joseph. I have just loved being with you. I'm so grateful to you for joining us all here. New York Insight thanks you. Tricycle thanks you. Thank you to Tricycle and the gang, Danya and Sam and James. And thank you to the gang at New York Insight, Dana and Seth and Amit. I'm so grateful to all of you. And I hope you all enjoyed this and feel inspired to create a life of integrity. Bye.